It was one of the most violent periods in Earth's history, when supervolcanoes blew their tops, sending ash and debris high into the atmosphere and causing climate chaos across the planet. But how exactly do scientists know which were the most explosive? They didn't blow up a bunch of stuff to find out. Instead, they turned to historical records and came up with something called a VEI rating to rank them by explosivity. And this week, researchers presented an improved version of that scale that might just make one of those ancient eruptions even more infamous. Let's dive into it. There are plenty of ways to measure the power of an eruption. You could look at how much material it ejected, or how high the ash cloud reached into the sky, or how far the blast wave traveled. But the problem is, different eruptions are good at different things. Some send lots of material into the air, but don't have particularly high ash clouds or blast waves. So there wasn't really a simple way to compare them all on a single scale until 1985, when a pair of volcanologists proposed something new. They created what's now known as the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI, which estimates the relative magnitudes of past eruptions based on the height of the eruption column, the volume of material ejected, the length of the eruption, and other observable features. The result is an integer between 1 and 8 that tells you how explosive an eruption was compared to others. Like a lot of scales like this, it's not perfectly continuous. It doesn't have values between whole numbers. Each category is just a range of possibilities, and then you pick the number that best fits the eruption you're looking at. And because these categories aren't set in stone, there's always room for debate. For example, in 2003, researchers reevaluated the famous eruption of Mount Vesuvius that destroyed the Roman city of Pompeii and updated its VEI from 4 to 5. That made it seem more powerful than originally thought, although some scientists have disagreed with that upgrade. But while we might quibble over the specifics, the VEI has been a useful tool for comparing eruptions generally and understanding which are the largest. That's especially important because some of the biggest eruptions in history happened before humans invented written language, and there's only geological evidence left behind. Without a good way to compare them, we might think that the largest eruptions are all from the same time period. Or maybe we might overlook the fact that there were even more eruptions during previous periods. But once we have a way to put them all on the same scale, we can see that the biggest eruptions weren't evenly distributed throughout history. Instead, there are these huge spikes where multiple massive eruptions happened within just a few thousand years. One of the largest occurred around 74,000 years ago when 5 volcanoes in what's now Indonesia blew up with VEI 8 eruptions. These included what is now considered the largest eruption in human history, the 2,000 cubic kilometer Toba catastrophe. At the time, humans were making cave paintings and jewelry and generally living the hunter-gatherer life. And after all that ash settled, our ancestors would have faced a world forever changed by the event. The atmosphere would have been filled with so much sulfur dioxide that it blocked sunlight and temperatures plummeted. Plants died off, and the carbon stored inside them was released into the air by decomposers, creating a runaway greenhouse effect. All that would have made for some seriously tough times, except there's some evidence that humans actually didn't experience any major population declines as a result. Maybe it's because they lived too far away to be affected. Or maybe they were already numerous enough to weather the storm. Or perhaps the recovery wasn't quite as bad as we thought. Regardless, another massive spike in VEI 8 eruptions followed about 13,000 years later, with 4 separate events in the same region, suggesting that whatever caused the first may have had something to do with the second. But just because we know about these spikes, that doesn't mean we know why they happened. One popular hypothesis is that they resulted from a superplume, a gigantic jet of hot gas and magma that rose from deep within the Earth's mantle. This hotspot was probably big enough to trigger several volcanoes at once, but also supplied enough heat to cause melting and produce even more magma chambers beneath the surface, leading to a chain reaction of eruptions. In fact, recent work suggests that this mechanism is still happening today. Beneath Indonesia, the source of all those giant historical eruptions may still be active, and we may just be entering the next superplume eruption period. But if that's the case, we should see evidence of it in the geologic record. And a team of researchers led by geologist Eva de Bates of Ghent University wanted to see if they could find it. To do that, they needed to come up with a better version of the VEI, one that was based on more data and produced smaller ranges for each category. That meant they could assign more precise values to ancient eruptions and maybe identify patterns like a series of closely spaced, large eruptions. In order to achieve this, they looked at every eruption that had happened since the year 1000 AD, for which they had sufficient data, and built the new VEI on top of that. First, they considered 8 different characteristics of eruptions, including the volume of material erupted and the eruption duration. Then they analyzed how well each of these characteristics matched up with the height of the eruption column, which is the factor the original VEI was primarily based on. They ended up selecting 4 that were most closely correlated with the height of the eruption. With those 4, they assigned a value to each characteristic for modern eruptions, and used that to calculate what similar values would look like in the geologic record, meaning you could use the same scale for ancient eruptions as long as you weren't relying on the actual height of the eruption column. Then they tested this new scale against existing VEI values for older eruptions and found that their new scale produced lower and narrower ranges for each category, which is exactly what they were hoping for. They also saw evidence of those 2 spikes in VEI 8 eruptions, along with a third lesser-known spike around 18,000 years ago. The new scale makes it clear that these 3 spikes stand out compared to the rest of the geologic record, suggesting that the same process was likely responsible for all of them. And that means it's more likely that we'll see another spike soon, although there's some debate over whether the superplumes really are the cause of this pattern. If you want to see more recent work on that, I've linked to a video all about it in the description below. For now though, it looks like this new scale will help us keep track of the biggest eruptions in history and uncover whatever secrets the geologic record is hiding. And the reason we can do that is because there are people out there who love learning about cool stuff like this and support the people who make that cool stuff possible. And of course, thank you for watching this episode and supporting the channel.